Wind 25 across the bow, a wet knife edge. Spray riffs along the catwalks and turns the deck's non-skid into a black sheen. The yellow shirts, the carrier's traffic cops move like an old song played fast. Palms up, wrists flicking, boots sliding backward, eyes never leaving a nose wheel. Stand clear of the cat. The first Hellcat takes the stroke. It doesn't float, it's punched. The nose dips an inch, the tail snaps, tires tap the shuttle track, and the aircraft is physically snatched into the day. For 1/2 second, the pilot is a passenger inside acceleration. Then he's flying. Gear thunks up. Ailerons twitch against the ship's slipstream. Above the wake, he carves into a left-hand spiral like a figure skater who never learned to love applause. The cadence settles. Signal, stroke, vanish, reappear as a speck over the white boil of the ship's wake. Every man on the deck is counting. Pilots count seconds to gear up and flaps set. Ordnance crews count pins and safeties, thumbs grazing metal edges like readers of Braille. Pryfly counts the lineup fighters off first to fence the sky, dive bombers to climb and settle, attackers from the waist. Below deck, in the sour air of gasoline and rubber, a chief petty officer counts gallons and margins, the arithmetic of, we can launch and still recover. The carrier is not a monument, it's a problem statement. Move 90 aircraft from cold steel to lethal velocity in minutes without wasting lift, fuel or time. Time is altitude. Altitude is discretion. And discretion is the power to pick your fight. The deck looks like choreography, but the better word is workflow. Elevator cycles feed a shot line. Hoists lift bombs while hoses bite into wing roots. A handler with a magnet board sketches taxi paths, so a shuttle is always kissing a nose wheel the instant the previous tail clears. On the island, behind glass, the air boss watches like a conductor who believes silence is part of the score. He flies the deck with timing, not with hands, 2 bow cats in rhythm, waist cat cycling while the bow resets. Launch when ready isn't license. It's a release into a pattern only he can see end to end. In CIC, down under red lights, a fighter director's voice moves pieces you cannot see from the deck. Angels 8, Vector 090, Bogies Angels 5, 30 right, 15. Economy of syllables saves fuel. Clarity converts seconds into survival. From the far shore, radar scopes and watchers report multiple inbound groups. That phrasing is the first shock. They expect a wave. What they see is weather cells forming and merging, heights and minutes out of sync, with comforting doctrine. Sweep above, divers on the clock, attackers late and low when flak has already spent its breath up high. The new geometry is not grandiose, it's simply layered. The defender's staff officer tries to bracket the problem with pencils and discovers he needs a calendar, not a ruler. On deck, small acts by big margins. A cat track is squeegeed between shots because pooled water steals fractions of stroke and fractions compound. A yellow shirt taps a wheel chock forward with his boot to shave a half-turn of brake. An ordnance man tapes a safety wire twist so a gloved hand can rip it clean while moving. None of this will make a poster. All of this adds up to a launch interval that stays under 30 seconds when it matters, and every second spared on deck becomes a second over target that doesn't come out of a pilot's nerves. At 0620, gull-winged bombers lumber into the air, cowl flaps gaping like gills. Torpedo planes hold the waist, heavy noses. Patient crews because the bow needs to breathe. Fighters above the wake stop spiraling and stretch into a racetrack, keeping a place in the sky for stragglers without turning formation into a joust. The ship's wake is a white underline that keeps drifting forward on the map, and the strike writes along that line. A procession of punctuation marks with ordnance for ink. 0629. A breath. Deck clear. There's no cheer. Brooms and coils appear from nowhere. Hands pat the cat track for hot spots, as if feeling for a heartbeat. The tannoy speaks recovery before the sound of the last engine fades into the east. Launches are promises, and promises end in landings, bolters, cut passes, 3 wires and near misses, fuel margins that feel like a fingernail's width of mercy. The romance belongs to someone else's sentence. The carrier prefers numbers. On shore, operators squint at new echoes already stacking behind the first. Offshore, the task group turns 2 degrees more into wind than looks necessary, because the boss is greedy for airspeed and stingy with risk. That, more than the spectacle of 90 specks converging on a concrete name across the strait, is what stuns Admirals. The realization that this arithmetic will be performed again at noon. It's not a wave, it's a schedule. If you describe an Essex-Class as big, you've said nothing. If you describe it as a factory for sorties, you've finally started. Inputs: aviation, gasoline, bombs and fuses, rockets in crates, engines in slings, weather windows, trained hands, orders that know what they want. Outputs: coherent raids that arrive as layers of intent within a fixed block of minutes. The miracle is not that it works once. The miracle is that it works on an unkind morning after a long night, and then again after lunch. Below the waterline, tanks segregate fuel as if it were temperament. Aviation gasoline moves through filters like a pilgrim through gates. Spark is the enemy. Static, a superstitious god watched by men who ground themselves before they touch metal. Magazines are Tetris in 3 dimensions. GP bombs, SAP bombs, rocket warheads, torpedoes nestled in cradles, ordnance crews, white jerseys, blackened palms start the ant march before dawn. Bomb bodies up the hoist, fuses marshalled, tail assemblies torqued, safeties pinned. The art isn't lifting, it's sequencing. No airplane waits at the cat because one part was still looking for its partner down a passage. On the hangar deck, the handler rules with a magnet board, each magnet an airplane, each inch a minute. He composes taxi lines that behave under stress, who rides elevator 1 to starboard forward, who goes aft, who noses around the island without nibbling the cat track. He shaves seconds you'll never notice by staging wheel chocks where eyes fall naturally and by refusing to accept that pilots can see over their own noses. If his board is right, the launch interval lives in the 25-30 second band across friction. Topsides, Pry-Fly is a glass box of quiet decisions. The air boss says little and moves time with his fingertips. Fighters first to build a shepherd's fence. Divers to climb into their geometry. Attackers from the waist because a heavy nose loves a straight line. He keeps a 2-aircraft pocket in the order where he can catch a balky engine or a dropped pin without the cadence tripping over itself. Launch when ready means the pattern is sound. Don't make me narrate it. Psi-C is the windowless brain that makes mass behave. Radar sweeps, grease pencils hop across a translucent plot. Talkers speak in sentences that sound spiritually allergic to adjectives. Bogies Angels 8, bearing 180, speed 250. Fighter direction is choreography at a distance arrive. Don't collide. Intercept, don't brag. Brevity is fuel, latency is theft. A controller who sounds calm gifts a pilot 5 beats of blood pressure he can spend later on a landing. Catapults are muscle hydraulic authority made repeatable. Stroke and wind over deck are weight margins in disguise. A cat that idles waste stack fuel. A cat that rushes invites a prop arc to kiss a careless sleeve. The goal is never showy. It's a metronome too steady to notice. Deck edge elevators are the doctrine hiding in steel. Lift airplanes while the deck stays alive, banishing the old disease where a lift froze a launch. Maintenance is the factory's conscience. Safety wire everywhere. Magnetos and plugs examined because a chief's ear didn't like yesterday's idle. Spare engines move like state secrets nobody brags about. A plane that lands hot can still fly at dawn because hands that never learn their pilot's first names work until midnight, and then 1 hour more. The pilot briefs, drinks coffee, and adds a rectangle to a map. The crew buys him forgiveness with wrenches. Buffers keep Miracle from becoming stunt, redundant radios and antennae. Parallel hoists so one jam doesn't ground a division. Extra hoses coiled where a failure becomes a shrug. Underway replenishment oilers slung alongside. Pallets flying across lines drags base to sea. The ship does not refill hope ashore. It refills fuel and bombs while keeping appointments. Culture finishes the machine. The deck's mood is urgent without bragging. Seconds are banked by habits that don't need applause. A chock nudged, a pin taped for gloved removal, a taxi queue flashed a breath earlier than expected. 90 airplanes airborne is not spectacle. It is cadence turned into effects. Launch efficiency buys minutes on target. Clean egress buys orderly recovery. Orderly recovery buys maintenance hours. Maintenance buys tomorrow morning's cadence. The Essex isn't big, it's timely. 90 isn't a brag, it's architecture. It gives you eyes, fists and knives in ratios that make the defender choose which wrong he prefers. Start with eyes. Fighters. 30 to 40 F-6Fs, split across jobs. The sweep leaps ahead to scissor interceptors before they gel, while escort sits shoulder to shoulder with bombers and a reserve rides high, indifferent to glory, ready to smash later rivals. Sweep prevents the enemy's clean meeting. Escort preserves bomber aim. Reserve buys patience. The rarest commodity in a sky full of guns. Fists are dive bombers 20 or so SB-2Cs to turn gravity into surgical decisions. Their business is angles and intervals. Push from offset bearings, stagger release by seconds, riddle a runway's first third, so takeoffs turn into moral choices and landings into coin flips. Their bombs matter less as weight than as concentration. Tight rectangles that collapse a function. Fuel transfer, power transform, maintenance throughput. Knives are the TBMs, adaptable mass. Against ships, torpedoes tuned and trusted. Against land, 1,000-pounders or a pair of 500s, sometimes a basket of HVARs like pockets full of bad intentions. Their strength is a steady run. They hold a line when flak begs them to jink. That steadiness converts courage into hit quality. If divers cripple a runway and fighters rake dispersal, TBMs carve arteries, roads, culverts, the service lanes that let a base pretend it can repair under fire. 90 matters because it lets you stage simultaneity without chaos. With 60, a fumbled sweep timing turns the bomber's minute into a year. With 90, you can run sweep in 2 echelons and still have cover over the package. You can split bombers into claws, runway suppression and sustainment kill, and let attackers follow as cutters. The defender must decide. Chase altitude and leave low angles unguarded, or mass guns for low and watch high angles walk in. Both choices are bad. That's the point. Composition is time as much as count. Build a 6 to 8 minute time on target window. T-5, fighters scythe the intercept layer. 0, divers begin from offset bearings. T+1, TBMs push low when traverse is still recovering from looking up. T+2, escort shifts from shepherd to executioner, strafing revetments and roads. T+3, reserve arrives to punish late interceptions and keep egress clean. Put otherwise, the package doesn't arrive as a choir, it arrives as parts of a machine that power each other. Fuel state becomes confidence instead of anxiety, because launch cadence bought time. Fighters can fight first and strafe later. Divers can do 1 pass right instead of 2 passes messy. TBMs can spend a breath lining up a culvert that will cost the enemy an hour of roadwork. The system's mercy is that average performances produce strategic effects when architecture is right. A pilot who misses a cue rolls with the next element. A bulky engine is switched with a spare without drawing blood from the schedule. Communications are the nervous system. Predetermined brevity that sounds almost bored because boredom is clarity. Blue push, gold go, red on fuel. 3 lines, 90 airplanes pivot. The strike leader doesn't monologue, he trims the machine. Recovery is not an afterthought, it's written into the composition. Egress lines don't cross friendly cap. Arrival windows are staggered to keep bolters from snowballing into chaos. 90 works because it does not ask heroics to fix design. That's why the number matters, not because it's large, but because it gives you redundancy without fragility and pressure without noise choices. The defender can neither solve nor postpone. 90 is structure. Pre-war arithmetic at Etajima prized waves. Prepare in the hangar. Arm under cover. Elevate the act. Perform on deck. Recover. Reset. The deck was a stage. Elevators were the gatekeepers. Time was brittle. A jam below turned schedule above into ash. Hardware encoded doctrine. Fewer elevators, slower lifts, narrow trunks that taught officers to accept drag-like weather. The Essex violated the premise in steel. Deck-edge elevators lifted without freezing taxi flow. Arming and fueling moved topside in parallel. Hoists fed bombs as hoses fed tanks. Cats did not sip time. They drank a measured gulp every 25, 30 seconds. The bottlenecks of memory elevator pause. Hangar choke became chores that overlapped like interlocking gears. The old sequence serial and fussy met a new one, parallel and rude. Control was expected to be centralized and episodic. Leadership narrating a single, handsome wave. What arrived was delegated coherence. CIC talked to multiple moving parts without tripping over itself. Vectoring fighters like chess moves played 3 turns ahead. Strike leaders adjusted inside a wide plan. Gold delays 30 seconds. Blue reserve high. Task groups braided launches across decks. Where the defender hoped for a gap after the first punch, he found another deck's knuckles arriving from an unhelpful angle. Armored decks and closed hangars promised a kind of moral timing: survive, then strike back. Essex throughput erased that pause. Function-first targeting was the cruelty. Workshops and tools, transformer yards, first thirds of runways, culverts on service roads. Airplanes without maintenance are timers. Airfields without roads are islands. Dispersal improved clever camo, decoy aircraft, fuel trucks parked with modesty. The carriers answered with rockets and prelay strafing that turned gun crews into reluctant statues for the first minute of the dive window. Intercept doctrine adapted. Controllers tried late ambushes on egress when fuel ran tight and formation frayed. The answer was reserve cap, pre-positioned along likely exits at offset altitudes, a denial more than a duel. Gun lines shifted to probable dive lanes and learned to ignore decoys. Composition flexed. More rockets early, fighter sweep deeper 5 minutes sooner. Escorts loitering a hair slower so the package stayed bound. The shock wasn't ignorance. It was calendar failure. Plans built around spikes met a system built around cycles. Repair crews learned to disperse and thus slowed themselves. Ammo was restaged to hot sectors and still ran dry because the next test arrived before restock trucks completed their longer loops. Controllers who used to believe in an all clear, that meant something, watched it turn into a ritual the enemy refused to respect. The window for counterpunches narrowed. The attacker's window widened until it felt like daylight all day. In the end, what Tokyo expected was a fight you could schedule around. What arrived was a fight that scheduled you. The Essex did not make waves bigger. It made time shorter for the defender, always, and left professionals staring at plots that behaved like weather rather than theatre. That is what stuns. Watching good doctrine age a decade in a week. Turn the ship 20 degrees into wind. That's the first line in the equation, not a flourish. Wind over deck is lift in the bank, and lift is what lets mass become altitude before the end of the bow. Suppose the natural wind is 12 to 15 knots out of the east, the sea gentle, whitecaps just scratching. The carrier brings 25 to 28 knots of its own. The sum is not poetry. It's airspeed across a wing. 40 knots over the deck does something simple and priceless. It cuts the ground roll and broadens the weight margin. A heavy torpedo plane that would sulk on a slack morning now leaps. A fighter carrying rockets doesn't eat as much deck before the cat has to earn its keep. You can feel the equation in your knees when you stand on the bow. The ship writes a river of wind under your boots, and airplanes drink from it. Now, map time into it. Launch cadence is the metronome that turns capability into throughput. A strict 25-second interval is handsome on a chalkboard. The deck lives with friction. Call it 25 to 30, tightening when the line is clean, loosening when a pilot fumbles, a magneto check or a holdback pin grumbles. What matters is not perfection but coherence. If your average interval across a whole division stays under 30 seconds, you move 12 airplanes in 6 minutes. 2 divisions of fighters and 1 of dive bombers that's 36 go in 18 to 20. Add a division of torpedo planes staged on the Teeb, waste cats, and you can nudge 50 before the deck officer's knuckles go white. At that point, the factory makes a choice. Complete the 90 in a single continuous push, or launch in braided packets. Fighters, divers, fighters again, attackers, so the deck can recover snags without collapsing the stack overhead. The choice is tactical, but the enabling math is the same, interval multiplied by count, moderated by deck geometry and wind. Everything hinges on parallelization. The Essex-Class was built to turn serial bottlenecks into parallel chores. Fueling, arming, and staging do not wait meekly for one another like schoolchildren. They overlap by design. Bombs come up on 2 hoists while fuel lines snake into wing routes on the next aircraft aft. A cat crew clears a shuttle while a handler has the next airframe already turned, so its nose kisses the track the instant the previous tail leaps. The aim is unromantic. Keep the catapult never idle, but never panicked. If the cat idles, your interval balloons and the stack burns fuel it should be saving for strafing. If the cat is panicked, you invite a mistake with a propeller or a hand or a pin, and the price is blood. Range and fuel are not afterthoughts. They're constraints that shape cadence. A fighter with drop tanks can loiter to shepherd a late division only if the launch wasn't sloppy. A dive bomber hauling a 1,000-pounder wants a clean push from the bow, so it doesn't need to fly dirty for long. A torpedo plane hates lingering on the deck with a heavy nose and a bad feeling. The faster you turn deck motion into sky motion, the more of the fuel budget you shift from waiting to form up into fighting and aiming. That arithmetic, the reallocation of minutes, is why Admirals obsess over cadence. It changes what the same gallon of 100 octane buys. Recovery windows, bracket launch math. A captain knows how long he can afford to keep the ship pinned into wind before she must wheel to bring her landing area green for returning aircraft. He watches the clock like a cardiologist reading a telemetry strip. If the launch schedule says 20 minutes out, 5 to settle, then egress, recovery begins 40, 5 to 50 minutes after the first shot earlier if a bird is wounded and asks for mercy. That means the last planes you launch today are either the fastest to the target or the ones with the fattest tanks. Otherwise, you're landing into your own strike on fumes. The factory thinks about this while the first engine starts. It's not an afterthought. It's the governor that keeps a 90-plane dream from turning into a mid-afternoon traffic jam at the stern. Add weather to the stack. Ceiling and visibility make or break a plan, but they also change the slope of the math. Low cloud lifts the fighter sweep's burden and sharpens the dive bomber's nerves. Crosswind is a tax you pay in seconds on the deck and in feet per second on approach. Sea state throws in a variable. Deck pitch steals a sliver of stroke from a catapult, just when a heavy airplane wants all of it. Chiefs bake those variables into the morning's rhythm as if they were constants, because for the next 2 hours they are. The test of a system is not whether it loves perfection, it's whether it can bias probability in its favor when the world is messy. That bias shows up in the average interval over time. All of this feeds the last line of the equation, repeatability. A one-time 90-plane fling proves a point to the men who launched it. It doesn't stun an enemy staff. What stuns is a schedule that can do it again after lunch, with a maintenance crew that didn't waste itself on grand gestures. The Essex solves for that by saving seconds where no one will write them down. A plane captain pre-stages a starter trolley where the next bird can bite it without delay. An ordnance man tapes a safety wire twist so it can be pulled with a gloved hand in one jerk. A handler nudges an airplane's tail with his knee at just the right instant so the pilot doesn't have to ride the brakes. Those gestures don't make headlines, they make throughput. And throughput multiplied by days writes history. CIC is the room where the ship grows eyes. No windows. Light low enough that your watch feels eternal. The air smells like coffee and pencil shavings, and the warm dust of electronics that never sleep. A radar scope sweeps and pulse blooms rise like fireflies in a jar. Each echo is a maybe, Bird, squall, formation, ghost. The job is to turn maybes into acts, and acts into timing, because timing is what makes 90 airplanes feel like a hand instead of marbles. Begin with the nets. CIC feeds and drinks from a tangle of radios, each with its own etiquette and tempo. There's a net for the fighter direction teams, another for strike control, others for ship-to-ship coordination inside the task group. On paper, this looks like bureaucracy. In the room, it is hygiene. One voice speaks to one job, and that voice stays clean, short, almost bored. A director who sounds excited is a director who burns your fuel by accident. Economy of syllables keeps latency low, and latency is the difference between a vector that feels anticipatory and one that feels like it's chiding fate from 10 miles behind. The plot is a membrane stretched across the room, translucent, reverse-painted with coastlines and rings. Grease pencils skate. Symbols blossom where tracks are born. Headings sprout like tails. Tiny alphanumeric labels grow like barnacles to keep who straight. Watchstanders talk with an economy that would make a banker jealous. Boyle 3, Angels 10, bearing 180, speed 250. That single line tells the director what the bogies are doing. In another corner, a talker reads back the outbound strikes, checkpoints, IP time, push altitude, egress heading as if those lines were an oath. They are. The room's primary faith is that clarity prevents waste, and waste of fuel, of altitude, of attention is the enemy. Fighter direction is choreography at a remove. Picture a director with a finger resting by a fine black line on the plot. He knows his cap is Angels 12, 2 divisions, one on station, one pulsing to drink from the tanker or to drift into the forward stack as the outbound raid climbs. He watches an inbound band of specks coalesce into conviction. Angles 8, speed shallow, perhaps a raid forming from a base whose name he can pronounce only because he's said it 100 times this week. He doesn't vector the cap to collide, he vectors to arrive. Blue 2, turn 090 for 30 seconds, then come right to 135. Angels 1 to 2, bogies Angels 8, 20 right, 15. The divisions slide. The intercept materializes as geometry instead of panic, and panic on the radio, in the cockpit, is a tax the system cannot afford. Strike control lives adjacent, speaking softly to a leader who already has his own house to run, divisions to hold, altitudes to deconflict, a bomb line to respect. The controller doesn't micromanage. He opens doors. Gold, you'll have 10 miles of clean sky at Angels 6 by the time you hit IP. Cap has your top. Red, expect light flak on the west end. Recommend push fast after release. These are not orders. They're packets of forecast that let a leader spend his attention on the 2 variables he can own, speed and order. Good control frees his mind to be ruthless about those and generous about everything else. CIC also runs the ship's memory. A recorder writes down vector calls and bogey plots as if scribbling a diary you'll need in court. After action, the room will replay its morning with a frankness that risks bruised pride. That is how latency gets shaved, how a sloppy call sign gets standardized, how a talker learns that copy is not a synonym for I have understood and will act. Culture radiates from these small corrections. The Essex doesn't worship hardware. It worships procedures that keep hardware from being asked to do magic. The most invisible role CIC plays is mercy. It watches fuel. A battered fighter with a chatter in his engine calls feet wet and low on gas. The controller checks the ledger in his head. Launch timeline, recovery cycle, winds aloft. Blue 3, come to 270 and descend to Angels 2. You are cleared straight in. Paddles is waiting. That sentence so light represents a small reweaving of the day. A recovery slot moves forward, a tanker orbit drifts to the east. A deck officer is warned that the next man to appear in the groove will be tense and thirsty. When this mercy is cheap, CIC spends it readily. When it is dear, CIC finds a way to make it cheaper by moving chessmen no one on the flight deck can see. Finally, the room's greatest virtue. humility in service of confidence. Radar lies sometimes. Weather tricks the scope. Radios die. The plot is a living thing, not a scripture. The men in CIC know this, and therefore keep their language clean and their priors light. But when the time comes to act, to push a reserve cap, to turn the ship 5 degrees to make a recovery window happy, to tell a strike leader his egress is dirty and he should go wide, they act with conviction. That mix is hard to teach. The Essex teaches it by making results visible. A clean intercept, a strike that lands on time, a deck that feels uncrowded even when it's full. In that feedback loop, confidence grows, not as swagger but as quiet repetition of 1,000 good choices. Imagine standing on a Japanese cruiser's bridge on that October morning, the glass salted, the air inside tense with the exact politeness of men who know what cannot be said aloud. The operations officer's face is a study in calm arithmetic. He has a plotting board, a headset pressed to one ear, and a pencil that has been sharpened down to a stub because he likes the line it makes when thin. On his table, tidily inked coastlines run like veins. On his plot, tiny wedges and arrows track what the radar and pickets report, multiple groups inbound, different altitudes, different bearings, different speeds. It is not the pattern he wants to see. He wants first wave, a single handsome vector, a known problem. What he has is weather cells of threat forming, dissipating and reforming. Training whispers solutions in his head. Scramble interceptors. Stack them by altitude. Assign squadrons to sectors. Do not chase. Guard the runway and the fuel. Kill the vanguard. Rally for a second pass. This is the art he studied when war felt like a complicated game with rules that honored professionalism. Reality is ruder. The first reports don't agree. One picket calls 30 fighters at Angels 12. Another calls a lower band moving faster, could be attackers, could be dive bombers still climbing. The operations officer can commit his interceptors to one picture, or split them, and risk being late to both. He feels the clock like a tight hatband around his head. On the bridge, the captain reads his man without looking. Posture, breath, the way his hand rests on the rail. He asks one question, not because he expects a perfect answer, but because the asking disciplines the room. Which is main effort? The operations officer hesitates exactly one heartbeat, a human beat, the beat that separates cleverness from courage. West band, top cover with it, reserve to north. It's not a guarantee, it's a choice. The captain nods. Orders become vectors. Engines in revetments cough and flame as men pull carts and spin propellers. In a ready room below, pilots buckle to their seatbelts and fumble gloves, their minds already leaning toward the sky, toward the curve of a climb that leads to an argument with strangers they will never meet again. The first fighters lift. The ground crew runs clear. The tower tries to keep a runway, clear for the next 2 minutes that will feel like an hour. At the far end of the strip, someone has parked a fuel bowser exactly where no one told him to. He will be shouted at later if there is a later. The operations officer marks his plot as if the pencil could make events behave. He knows what should happen next if this were the old fight. The first wave arrives, hungry and focused. We meet it with mass. We lose some men but break the shape of the attack, and the recovery interval buys us repair time. What happens instead is subtle and sickening. The first raid does not behave like a first wave. It behaves like the beginning of a pressure system. Fighters slash the edge of the sky at an altitude. The first pair of interceptors cannot comfortably reach before their fuel becomes a counsel of caution. Dive bombers arrive not in a Roman wall but in 2 claws, one for runway, one for the clustered buildings that matter more than concrete this morning. Attackers ride in lower, later, after every gun on the field has been yanked through 90 degrees twice. The captain hears guns bark and sees smoke. He hoped not to see black and greasy where fuel should not be burning yet. He eyes the horizon for a shape, a ship's dagger line, as if the carriers might be charitable enough to show themselves. They don't. They live beyond sight and operate on a calendar the defenders do not own. It is not that the defenders are clumsy, they fight well. A pair of interceptors dives clean through a bomber section, and leaves 2 black freckles of wreckage in the fields beyond the strip. A gun crew on the east revetment learns to lead low attackers by a span that surprises them. A controller with a voice like steel thread keeps one last pair of climbers from wasting themselves in a useless chase. There is bravery everywhere you look. But bravery is trying to close a valve that the sea keeps opening. The operations officer finds himself doing a new kind of math. He calculates not simply the bearing to the next inbound, but how much time his runway crews need to sweep wreckage and how much flak ammunition is left in the ready bins on the southern arc. He hears the phrase "another group" too often, and his pencil breaks. It's not dramatic. The lead just snaps. He blinks, takes another stub from a cup, and continues. He does not think this is important until later, when he realizes that even his tools feel like they are being used up faster than habit expects. Somewhere behind him, an older staffer murmurs something about American cycles. The words are meant as analysis, not despair. The captain files them, looks at the sky again, and understands the enemy has brought a tempo that cannot be solved with better piloting alone. He needs time. The raids are designed to deny it. He needs clear priorities. The raids are designed to force him to answer 2 questions at once and punish either answer. He needs to believe in a pause after the blow. The carriers erase the idea of pause. When the last contrail fades, the air smells like dust and hot brass. There is a patch of runway you can land on if you are precise and resigned. There is less fuel than the plan wants, and more smoke than dignity allows. The operations officer exhales and does a thing you wouldn't expect from a man in his position. He erases. He clears the plot entirely and redraws the coastline from scratch, as if a clean picture can force a reset. It can't, but the act helps him make a different kind of choice when the next report arrives. He starts thinking in hours, not in waves. He calls for dispersal patterns that court inconvenience. He asks that ammunition be restaged closer to the guns that fired hottest, even if it offends neatness. He tells the captain that they must expect the wrongness to continue. The captain nods again, once. He is not stunned into stillness. He is stunned into a new kind of movement, responses for a fight that refuses to keep office hours. The Tend logbook calls it launch sequence, which is like calling a symphony a list of notes. What actually unfolds from start engines to deck clear is a braid of human decisions that live inside half minutes. The best way to see it is to walk the clock. 15 minutes. Below decks, the ordnance crews have already made their last irreversible choices. Fuses are mated, safeties pinned, last checks tapped with gloved knuckles. On the hangar deck, a handler studies a magnet board where each tiny slug stands for a real airplane and a man whose mother knows his first name. He slides 2 magnets closer to the elevator symbol, then pauses habit, superstition, a 6th sense about taxi space, and moves 1 back. That single inch will save 10 seconds later and no one will ever know. T10. On deck, the air smells like warm oil and the cold salt of a day that hasn't made up its mind. Plane captains climb onto tires, into wells, under wings. They speak to their pilots with hands because voice is too slow. A palm to the eye shield. Check. 2 fingers. Magnetos. Thumb up. Good. The cat crews walk the tracks, eyes on the steel, not the sky. A line of safety pins dangles from a man's belt like a hunter's trophies. He hates them. He loves that he hasn't dropped one. T8. Start engines. The words slap the deck through the tannoy. Prop arcs blossom one after another, a field of transparent discs beating the ocean flat. The sound assaults the body more than the ear. It rearranges your organs. A seaman not yet 20 clenches his jaw unconsciously against the vibration. An older chief smiles without humor and pops a stick of gum. Gauges creep toward numbers that mean, we can trust this. Oil pressure, manifold, temp. The ship is already turning. No one looks at the wake, but everyone feels its line. T6. Elevators arrive with their little shudders, bringing up airplanes that smell like effort. Tow bars clank, then vanish. Yellow shirts. To begin the shuffle. A backwards glide, knees flexed, palms out, coaxing nose wheels and tail wheels across a maze only they can see. It's not, move here. It's move here exactly enough to keep the shuttle clear and the wingtip clear of that radio mast. The deck becomes a loom. Airplanes are threads pulled through narrow heddles. A handler catches a pilot's eye and taps 2 fingers to his own, look at me, not the horizon, because the next 6 seconds are critical, and seeing the wrong thing can cost them. T4. On the waist, a bomber sniffs at the shuttle like a horse at a fence. The holdback bar is engaged. The cat crew perform an anti-dance. Stiff, deliberate, the opposite of flourish. Pins checked, then checked again. Hands trace lines. Eyes translate touch into certainty. The cat officer watches. Without watching, he is seeing the next 2 airplanes and the one after that, sensing if the rhythm will hold or if he needs to steal a second here to pay back a second there. T3. Pryfly calls a final note into the wind. Launch when ready. That's not license. That's choreography turning itself loose to move without further narrative. The boss has already paid attention to the one variable he gets to influence now. Order. He wants fighters first to build the shepherd's fence over the wake. He wants divers next because they will climb to their work and need time to arrange themselves. He leaves the attackers to the waist where they can bite the air without fouling the bow. He also leaves himself a pocket 2 airplane lengths, no more where he can catch debris or error without having the cadence fall over itself. T2. Stand clear of the cat. The first shot is always tense because the system is snapping from static to kinetic. But once the nose leaps, the room exhales. 25 seconds is both long and short. Long enough for a man to think a foolish thought, short enough that most don't. The next airplane is already moving when the first is a speck. At the waist, the bomber's tail twitches as its pilot rides the brakes, wanting to creep, but not to creep too far. An ordnance man flattens himself against a bulkhead with a casualness he didn't feel. T1. The third and fourth shots happen faster because the human body adapts to shock and then converts it into habit. That is good for tempo and bad for safety. Chiefs live to balance the two. One barks a correction without turning his head. Helmet. A boy yanks the strap under his chin as if he were already in the groove for recovery. T0 to T+6 minutes. The launch becomes a living thing. The deck's language shrinks to signals you could carve on a coin. The yellow shirt's wrists. The cat officer's 2 fingers. The hangar boss's one curt nod as he sends the next pair up the lift at exactly the moment the starboard cat flicks free. Overhead, fighters spiral but not carelessly. They fly with a discipline that looks like grace from afar. The first 4 settle into a racetrack over the wake, marking time so that the 17th and the 29th know where to find their slot without eating up the sky jousting for it. T+7 to T+12. Now the choreography flexes. A bomber balks, mag drop ugly, cylinder fouling, and the handler reads it faster than the pilot's mouth can form the confession. He palms the wing, signals a cut, and peels the airplane out of the sequence like a surgeon removing a stitch. A spare trundles into its place with a nudge that would be rude in a ballroom and is life in this one. The cat crew never shows relief. They don't have time for emotions, only for correctness. T+13 to T+18. The last division rides the waist. The deck is a study in negative space, a clear path where confusion could have grown. The boss eyes the clock and the compass. He feels the ship's subtle heel as the rudder bites to hold wind exactly where the cat needs it. Down below, a man in a compartment no one visits during daylight watches a pressure gauge on a hydraulic line and adjusts a valve an eighth of a turn. He will never see a launch, but his touch saved a stroke of cat power from sagging, and a pilot he doesn't know will owe a comfortable margin over the bow to a number on that gauge. T+19 to T+20. Deck clear. It's a small sentence that holds a day inside it. The deck crew does not cheer. They sweep, they coil lines, they pat the cat track with their palms, as if feeling for a heartbeat. Above, the package forms. The ship continues to turn a little more into wind than seems necessary because the boss is greedy for airspeed and stingy with risk. He does not apologize for either trait. The choreography is over, but the dance is not. The deck resets itself for the next truth, the fact that every launch is really a promise to recover, and promises weigh more than bombs. If you want to know what a carrier can do to a target, stop thinking in tonnage per sortie and start thinking in explosive pounds delivered per minute on target. That metric, cold, slightly ugly, turns romance into arithmetic. It also explains why a 90-plane package feels less like a raid and more like a controlled detonation stretched across a clock face. Break the package into ledgers. Fighters first. They are not bombers, but in late 44 they often carry workman-like loads, 250 or 500-pounders, or a clutch of HVARs. Their economics are about timing and repeatability. A fighter that drops early in the run rakes revetments on the exit with 50 cal, converting remaining fuel into suppression. That means each fighter contributes maybe 500–1,000 pounds in a quick burst and then buys minutes of no-aim fire denied to the defenders. Think of that as the fighter's dividend. Smaller principal, wider yield. Dive bombers are the precision capital. 20 or so SB-2Cs, each hauling a 1,000-pound GP or SAP bomb, give you a block of 20,000 pounds that can be husbanded into 3 or 4 decisive aim points. It's not the weight that matters, it's concentration. If each section staggers release by 6 to 8 seconds and attacks from offset bearings, you smash the same functional node, say, the first third of the runway with multiple overlapping damage patterns. A crater in the first 500 feet of concrete chokes takeoffs. 2 craters at different depths and distances make repair crews argue. Fill the deep one first, or the shallow one fast. The argument is time you steal. Torpedo planes, TBMs, are your adaptable mass. Against land, they're bombers with legs. Against ships, they're knives. Assume 18 of them each carry 2 500-pounders or 1 1,000-pounder plus rockets. That's another 18,000, 36,000 pounds in the ledger. But again, the lens is minutes. A TBM's steady run, longer sightline, lower altitude, more time under small arms and light flak means it turns fuel into aim. When an attacker rolls in at 1,000, 200, 1,000, 500 yards, and refuses to jink until the sight picture is right, you get hit quality that a higher, faster pass can't buy. Now tilt the ledger toward rate. Suppose the package's ordnance is released across a 6–8 minute time on target window, TOT, typical of a well-run strike with sweep already chewing the sky and escort suppressing guns. If your combined drop mass is conservatively 40,000, 55,000 pounds, then your delivery rate sits around 5,000, 9,000 pounds per minute. That feels abstract, until you map it to target categories. A fuel farm takes X pounds to rupture tanks and set the field alight. A power station's transformers need Y pounds striking in a tight rectangle to stop a grid. An ammunition revetment needs less weight but better timing, one early hit to spook hands, one late hit to catch the bucket brigade. Rate lets you sequence destruction so decisions don't land singly, they arrive piled on each other. Rockets skew the calculus. The 5-inch HVAR, Holy Moses, is flight deck cynicism turned into physics, a cheap, fast way to pour steel into soft targets, parked aircraft, trucks, gun pits, without burning the bomb inventory. A division of fighters with 8 HVARs each puts hundreds of pounds of high explosive into precise rectangles in seconds. Rockets don't replace bombs. They precondition the aim area by breaking the hands that would otherwise fight fires, tow airplanes, or wheel carts of sand and gravel toward a crater. Ammunition economics extend to gun time. 6 fighters spending 15 seconds each at effective range is 90 seconds of 50 cal broom across revetments, dispersal roads, and the first 100 yards of runway shoulders. Each second is roughly 50 rounds per gun, across 6 guns 1,500 rounds per aircraft. Magnify that by a handful of aircraft, and you're converting a minute into tens of thousands of jacketed problems for anyone caught upright. Gun time buys you the most undersung commodity: repair delay. Men can work under fear of the next bomb. They cannot work under the hot, skipping lash of strafing. The defenders have math too. Ready-use ammo stocks by each gun pit. Spare barrels, traversing limits, cooldown cycles, elevation gear, and the geometry of interlocking fire all set their ceiling. Your job is to saturate their cycle. A classic trick. Dive bombers arrive at a predictable angle that draws fire up. Right then, attackers enter low from the opposite quarter. Guns must traverse brutally. Crews must swing their bodies against resistance. And the barrels already hot must choose either to chase and risk jam or to ignore and watch bombs walk in. Saturation is not about maximum weight. It's about uncomfortable simultaneity. Recovery economics close the loop. A 90-plane strike that lands low on fuel, out of sequence, or with multiple bolters, spends tomorrow's sortie capacity today. That's why bombs per minute must be paired with minutes saved before and after. Launch cadence bought the strike a larger time budget over target. A clean, marshal and egress preserve enough fuel for an orderly recovery, so maintenance crews can turn airplanes without triage. The outcome is not only a blown transformer or a runway chewed to chalk, it's a second strike on the same day with nearly the same rate. That, not a single dramatic number, is what makes Essex economics cruelly efficient. If you want it all in one sentence, the Essex turns gallons and seconds into overlapping decisions the enemy cannot service. When your bombs, rockets, and bullets land in layers across 6 minutes, you're not just breaking concrete. You're breaking time, his time, into pieces too small to hold a counterplan. Think of Formosa as a 4-day demonstration that the carrier's mathematics wasn't a rumor. It was a schedule the enemy could read only after the fact, when plots and diaries tried to make sense of noise that hadn't stopped long enough to be properly named. Day 1. Knock and enter. Before dawn, task groups slide to their launch points. Weather is cooperative, if jumpy, patchy cloud layers, mild crosswinds. The first packages are textbook. Sweep up front. Fighters chewing intercept layers above 10,000 feet. Dive bombers drilling runways. Attackers cutting secondary arteries, power, fuel, to access roads. Reports later describe multiple inbound groups at staggered altitudes. That's the braided rope effect. 2 decks launching in slightly offset cadence mean the defender never meets a single clean wall. On the ground, the first pass tears the first third of runways and lightly touches dispersal. Repair crews run. Then the second wave does the rude, necessary thing. It drops offset not on identical aim points, but on the progresses of repair. This is how you make men feel attacked by time, not steel. Observers write about fires that relit themselves, which is really shorthand for a schedule that refused to give men enough cool air between jobs to regain composure. Day 2. The cycle bites. The defenders adjust. Dispersal improves. Gun crews restage ammo crates to the sectors proven hottest. Interceptors try to time takeoffs between waves, choosing egress corridors to catch bombers after the dive. It's good adaptation. It is also the day when underway replenishment proves the difference. While defenders turn trucks and patches, the carriers eat fuel and bombs from oilers and ammunition ships with almost bureaucratic calm. The strike math remains the same. By afternoon, another set of 90-ish sorties marshalled, another set of minutes stacked over aim points with grim accuracy. You see psychological drift in logs. Airfield unserviceable appears not as a single dramatic statement, but as an annoying refrain. Anecdotes define the texture. A TBM crew claims a power substation with a late switch to an alternate after smoke obscures primary. A fighter division strafes service roads and notes more trucks than aircraft. Destroyed evidence that the Japanese are switching to logistics on the move. Dive bombers report light flak tightening into mean flak near fuel pits, proof the defenders are learning where the pain really lives. Day 3. The counterpunch. By now, the defenders try to mass interceptors earlier, abandoning piecemeal climbs to form teeth. The carriers answer not by adding weight, but by retiming their pieces. A deeper fighter sweep goes in 5 minutes earlier. The escort throttles back a hair to keep the package connected. Rockets grow in the mix to rake gun lines revealed on day 2. A small thing with big impact. The fighter director shifts a cap reserve to sit astride a likely egress ambush. 2 sections of enemy fighters dive, meet fresh Americans, and spend their fuel on defense rather than pursuit. The result on the ground? The bomber's egress line runs cleaner, which means they land with better fuel margins, which means fewer emergency recoveries, which means maintenance stays on schedule. One geometry tweak in CIC buys you 3 invisible wins later. The human beat is there too. A plane captain writes one sentence to a friend: "The ship smells like burned coffee and hot brakes," which is precisely the smell of tempo. A Helldiver rear gunner admits he kept his thumb on the trigger longer than doctrine wanted on the second pass, catching a truck and a running shape in the same burst. This is where doctrine and fatigue meet. The system protects him from his own drift by furnishing escort energy overhead and recovery discipline astern. Day 4. The lesson sticks. The carriers don't need a crescendo. They need proof of repeatability under friction. Weather chops up formations. An elevator hiccup delays 2 aircraft. A spare smooths the line. On the last major push, the strike leader calls an audible. The runway is cratered enough. He shifts half his divers to maintenance shops identified by yesterday's photographs, and TBMs shift to access roads instead of secondary runways. The goal isn't destruction for its own sake, it's denial of recovery. By afternoon, the defenders still have airplanes and courage. What they lack is the continuity that makes force projection possible. When the task groups shear off, the battle's story isn't just claims and counters. It's that each day performed like the first, even as variables moved. The Essex did not depend on a single trick. It depended on a supply of minutes, one on deck and spent over targets. Formosa 4 days of clockwork in messy weather codified a truth. Throughput beats heroics when the fight lasts longer than anyone's breath. Stunned didn't mean naive. It meant out, scheduled. The defenders had seen heavy blows before. What they hadn't faced sustained with calm was a system that translated ship speed, deck geometry, radar clarity, and logistics into repeatable pressure. The Essex taught that the unit of action was not the strike, but the cycle. A spike is a spectacle. Mass, noise, a photograph where the sky is busier than the horizon. You endure it. Count your losses, sweep your runway, rotate barrels, redistribute fighters, and expect a breath. A cycle denies the breath. Its defining qualities are boring words: average launch interval, oil temperature, assembly time, recovery order that add up to a day with no quiet edge. When the cycle holds, your early decisions compound into later advantages. A clean first launch grants 5 extra minutes on target. Those 5 minutes translate into fewer go-arounds and bolters on recovery. Cleaner recovery grants maintenance crews an hour of order. That hour yields engines turned and leaks cured. And suddenly the afternoon looks like the morning in power, not in faded imitation. From the defender's side, the shock lives in 3 places. First, tempo uncertainty. They could no longer predict when recovery windows would open gaps. Why? Because task groups braided launches and recoveries across decks. The defenders' best ambush catching bombers or fighters as they egress into a recovery cycle went sour when another deck's package arrived at a slightly different angle. A calendar that used to run in blocks collapsed into overlapping slices. Second, function-first targeting. Pre-war thinking fixated on aircraft kills and ship kills as the main ledger. Essex cycles punished maintenance capacity shops, tool rooms, test stands and movement capacity access roads, fuel trucks, switch yards. The defenders were stunned to discover that aviation without maintenance is a timer and airfields without roads are islands. Once that lesson landed, they tried to disperse shops and traffic. Essex answered with rockets and strafing to keep hands down. The cycle had room to adjust because it had spare minutes and spare aircraft to reassign. Third, Psychological topology. A single hard blow creates a morale trough followed by an adrenaline rebound. A cycle creates shallower troughs that never end. Crews never reach the rebound. They live at a controlled simmer. You see it in tiny artifacts, a plotting officer who sharpens pencils 3 at a time because he's learned that one pencil's life is shorter than one wave, a gun chief who orders water buckets staged not for fire but for barrel cooling, a line of trucks that idles farther from the strip because the drivers believe the next pass will punish proximity. These are rational micro-adaptations that also signal confidence erosion. The Japanese had clever counters. They tried asymmetric timing, launching interceptors late to catch egress, moving guns to probable dive lanes, staging decoy fires to pull attention from real targets. Some worked, briefly, but the cycle adapts. CIC shifts egress 10 degrees. The strike leader changes push by 3 minutes to break a new flak rhythm. Deck crews alter composition 2 more fighters, 2 fewer divers with no ceremony. The defender discovers he is playing chess against an opponent whose pawns sometimes move like knights because the underlying system allows it. Numbers underscore the feeling. A base that expects 1 heavy visit per day can plan 1 repair surge and 1 ammunition restock. With Essex cycles, the base must plan for 2 or 3, with unpredictable spacing. That strains fuel dribbles and ready-use stocks. It also strains pilots flying near their physiological limits, crews whose night isn't truly night because the next morning looks like today. Stunned is what professionals say when they meet competence wrapped around resources and habit, so tight that courage can only buy minutes, never daylight. There's a moral here beyond the numbers. Cycle isn't just about winning faster, it's about reducing variance. A spike-heavy doctrine is hostage to luck weather. First, contact timing, the weird role of a ship during recovery. A cycle-heavy doctrine averages luck out of the day. Over a week, variance melts and capacity dominates. That is the kind of truth that sounds dull in lectures and feels like doom on a plotting table. In the end, what stunned them was not that American carriers could launch 90. It was that 90 was not an event. It was a setting. Turn the knob. The sound you hear is the factory at sea humming at its preferred RPM. You can shoot down airplanes, you can hit a ship, you can score a tactical point, and the knob remains in the same position, ready to hum again at noon. A system that refuses to pause invites clever enemies. The Japanese adapted fast, often elegantly. You can trace their counterpunches like fingerprints in the logs, and you can see the Essex learning back, because a cycle is a schedule with room for edits, radar pickets and early cues. Japanese shore radar and lookout networks tightened, and controllers tried to build staggered intercept ladders instead of a single climb. They placed fighters at pre-briefed altitudes and bearings where American ingress routes had proven convenient. Counter. The carriers pushed sweep echelons deeper 5 minutes earlier, not to win dogfights for glory but to break assembly. Escort throttle discipline kept the bombers a little slower, which seems wasteful until you factor coherence. A tight package spends less time on the IP and extracts cleanly, which saves airplanes for the afternoon. Gun lines as geometry. After day 1 anywhere, flak got smarter. Guns massed along probable dive lanes, and crews learned to ignore decoys. Counter. Composition shifted to add rockets and low strafing early, not as an afterthought. Fighters ran a pre-lay rake across known gun pits, 30 to 60 seconds before the divers started down. That is not machismo, it's suppressant. If you cut crew heads low at T-45 seconds, the first 2 sections of bombs get better aim points, and the last sections face less accurate traverse. Night and twilight. Japanese planners probed the edge hours dawn and dusk to test whether carrier recovery windows could be gamed. Counter. The Thomas Doty task groups increased nightcap coverage, moved pickets farther out, and trained pilots to night traps the most nerve-draining skill set on a flight deck. This was a doctrine and culture shift. Night ops had long been the realm of specialists. Essex cycles normalized it, adding minutes to the day that the enemy thought were safely theirs. Decoy, and dispersal discipline. Parked aircraft decoys, clever camo on fuel trucks, fake power sheds, these are ancient tricks. The Japanese did them well. Counter. Reconnaissance got petty and pattern-based. Strike leaders briefed, if smoke turns here instead of there, it's a decoy pipe. And, real shops produce waste trails, look for stains. Fighters were assigned eyes, only tasks on the first pass to confirm which rectangles in black and white photos actually mattered today. The cycle has room for this because cadence creates surplus attention. Not everyone is pressed to the red line all the time. Late intercept ambushes. A favorite counter was to let the strike pass, then pounce on egress when fuel was lowest and formation most ragged. Counter. CIC, pre-positioned reserve. Cap, along likely egress corridors at offset altitudes. The idea is not kill counts. It's denial turning a planned ambush into a quick defensive tangle that robs the enemy of the only clean shot of the day. Add a small turn in the egress, heading 10 degrees right of habitual, and you break yesterday's trap with almost insulting ease. Counter logistics. Shore parties shifted ammunition and fuel caches farther from runways, forcing defenders to work longer pushcarts and road loops. Counter. Attackers spent bombs on roads and culverts, which looks wasteful if your mental model worships runways. But a destroyed culvert means no truck cross-load, and no cross-load means guns run dry during the second wave. Weapons economics again. A 500-pounder on a road at the right bend buys more minutes denied than a 500-pounder on one more cratered patch of concrete. Psychological bounce back. The defenders tried to engineer morale by declaring all clear promptly and rallying repair crews with visible act, first orders, drag wrecks, chalk lines, fill holes, push carts. Counter. Cycles undermine ceremony. A second wave arriving while chalk is still white turns ritual into risk. Repair crews learn not to congregate. Supervisors learn to disperse leadership. That's good adaptation, but it also slows them by design. The enemy's best resilience becomes your ally. Safe behavior is slow behavior. The carriers didn't win every exchange. Weather stole echelons. Mechanical gremlins stacked at the wrong minute. A flak battery got lucky and tore a hole in a division's nerve. But the cycle's feedback loop is forgiving. After action in the ready rooms and CIC is blunt. The vector that came 2 seconds late. The magneto check that should have been caught. The call that buried a call sign in static. Tomorrow's plan incorporates those bruises. Fighters push 30 seconds earlier. Divers adopt 2-second spacing instead of 3 to shorten T. TBMs shift to staggered altitudes to confuse traverse. None of these changes is dramatic. All of them stack. Adaptation reaches the deck too. A yellow shirt marks a new chalk spot that shortens a taxi arc by a half-wheel turn. An ordnance chief pre-stages alternate fuses for a last-second target switch. A maintenance lead decides that plug changes happen at 2000, 100 whether the book says 2000, 200 or not. These are human edits to the machine's schedule. They look trivial until you run the simulation across a week and see one more aircraft make each afternoon launch because a dozen small choices shaved 4 minutes of waste. In the end, counterpunch and adaptation turn into a conversation. The Japanese talk with intercepts, flak rhythms and repairs. The Essex answers with vectors, cadence and composition. The surprise is not that either side is clever, it's that one side has a microphone that never loses power. That's the cycle. That's why counters seldom grow into cures. And that is how a factory at sea, patient and slightly merciless, writes its will onto the map not as a single exclamation point, but as a line that does not stop. A plane captain named Ruiz, nobody calls him by his first name. The deck isn't that kind of place arrives before the tannoy, coffee in a steel mug that tastes like last month's varnish. He wears the deck's smells on him, hydraulic oil in the cuffs, cordite in the cloth, a ghost of gasoline that never washes out. His helldiver sits with its mouth open, cowl flaps gaped like a fish. Ruiz's palm tests warmth on a cylinder head. He doesn't need a gauge to know if the airplane is ready. His hand reads metal the way a blacksmith reads heat. He will check safety wires until his fingers ache. He will say almost nothing to his pilot, because the most important words are already agreed, "You'll come back," and the rest is superstition. Down the passage, in Ready Room 2, a torpedo plane gunner named McCrae rubs his thumb along the edge of a photograph. Not a sweetheart. Not a home. It's a power substation, black lines and grey boxes, a print the Intel kid pulled in a hurry. McCrae traces the transformers as if they had skin. He knows what their failure looks like from 1,000 feet and what it sounds like when the TBM's doors open. He tells himself not to stare down the sight too long, not to ride the run until Flack can read his mind. He knows he will ride it anyway. On the island, a junior officer with a pencil behind one ear stares at the deck, the way chess players stare at the middle game. He is learning to see the board in layers, the yellow shirt's wrists, the prop arcs, the space between wingtips that is smaller than his appetite for risk, the catapult shuttle's tiny hitch that says water pooled in the track again. He speaks once every 5 minutes, never more, and each time, he does the cat crew's shoulders relax, a fraction because the voice means the pattern holds. He is not a hero, he is a thermostat. In CIC, a talker named Fisk writes on a pad the names of men he will never meet. Blue 2, gold lead, red 3. He writes their fuel states, their angels, their vectors, and an odd little note when one of them says copy in a tone that sounds too brave. He knows how pilots sound when they are lying to themselves about fuel. He has permission to be merciful precisely once per recovery cycle. He will spend that mercy on the second man who asks, not the first, because the first one always asks with better grammar. Launch. Ruiz jogs to the island's shadow and watches his bird go. He always watches. It's a superstition disguised as discipline. McCrae will be under Flack in an hour, counting seconds in a voice he can't hear over the engine. The junior officer will discover, with a small private shock, that he anticipated a pilot's mistake he has never seen before, and the cat stroke will come clean anyway. Fisk will hold a finger over a call sign until the pilot breathes between syllables, and then give him the straight-in he didn't want to ask for. Recovery. Tires thump, hooks spark. A bolter raises every pulse to the roof, and then the man catches the 3-wire on the second try, and no one claps because the price of luck is humility. Ruiz runs a palm along the helldiver's skin and feels new heat, new floors, new life. McCrae climbs down with his mouth's corners white and says nothing. He draws a rectangle in the air with his finger, the shape of a target that will not make electricity today. The junior officer circles a time on his clipboard that is 20 seconds better than doctrine and tells no one. He files it with himself. Fisk tears the top page from his pad and slides it under a mug, because the ink isn't dry and the ship is still moving. The deck crew wash their hands at midnight, and the water turns black. They go to their racks smelling like noise and work. The men sleep differently. Ruiz sleeps as if someone has told him they need him again soon. McCrae sleeps with his fists relaxed for the first time all day. The junior officer dreams in intervals and wakes to a ship that hums exactly like yesterday. Fisk sleeps lighter than a cat and, in the morning, will find pencil lead on his pillowcase like evidence. The Essex-Class didn't just attack bases. It attacked time itself across a theatre. You can track the change on a map if you draw not arrows but windows, periods when the enemy can project air power. Before the Essex cycle matured, those windows were elastic. A base hurt one day could reopen the next, patch a runway, shuffle fuel, fly at dawn with enough fighters to make a convoy sweat. After the cycle hardened, windows narrowed until they became slits. Repair crews worked under strafing, convoys maneuvered under reconnaissance that felt personal, and planners stopped pretending a damaged field would stay repaired long enough to enable an operation. This is not rhetoric, it's the quiet birth of operational paralysis. Leyte is where the arithmetic turned into momentum. Carrier aviation didn't win later alone. Armies and battleships and submarines have their claims. But Essex throughput altered the tempo every other arm operated within. Japanese naval air was asked to do the impossible. Surge, relocate, regenerate, and counterpunch while its workshops burned and its airfields would not stay open. The economy of force flipped. The Essex could spend fuel to deny fuel, spend bombs to deny maintenance, spend minutes to deny days. Each denial rippled forward. Escorts landed more supplies because attacks were thinner. Ground forces maneuvered under skies less crowded with threat. Submarine packs hunted an opponent forced to move shipping at odd hours and bad routes to dodge reconnaissance that never blinked. Move the calendar forward. As the war approached the home islands, the carriers didn't become invulnerable, they were hit. They bled, but their schedule reached a kind of cruel maturity. Nightcaps, bad weather launch procedures, refined recovery orders, and an unrep pipeline that felt like cheating all combined to produce an almost industrial predictability. Strike in the morning, strike in the afternoon, adjust in the evening. Mainland targets that had once been thought safe by distance learned the lesson air power keeps teaching range matters, until throughput makes it irrelevant. You can be far and still be on the schedule. The strategic effect is easiest to see in the enemy's choices shrinking. Do you mass aircraft to defend a specific sector, risking a later strike somewhere else, or do you disperse and let local punches land unopposed? Do you invest in runway repair or in moving workshops inland? Do you fly at dawn when the carriers might be recovering an old good time to pounce, or at noon when they are certainly launching again? Every answer carries an opportunity cost, and the cycle makes those costs steeper, because the next test arrives sooner than your adaptation can propagate. Even the moral geometry of the war tilts. The Essex reduces the need for desperate last-throw gestures, single raids flown on lucky forecasts, because probability becomes your ally. Over a week, average performance yields decisive results. Over a month, maintenance discipline becomes victory's spine. That matters to crews who have to survive long enough to feel strategic direction as something more than a slogan. It also matters to the enemy, who begins to read doom not in singular catastrophes but in a series of competent Tuesdays. In the end, strategic consequence is not a banner headline. It's 1,000 footnotes that all say the same thing. The enemy's planning horizon shortened while yours lengthened. From later to the home islands, the Essex turned the Pacific into a place where distance could not rescue the unready and where time, once the ally of defenders, voted with the attackers. Dusk on the bridge wing. The ocean is a slate pulled tight, the ship a pencil drawing a line no one will see in the morning. The deck is clean in the way that only a used deck is clean, scuffed, chalked, holy to those who work it. Down below, engines tick as they cool. Somewhere a chief writes a number in a log, a small integer that carries a day inside it. Launches, 90, 2. Recoveries, 90, 1. Bolters, 3. Night traps, 2. Another number, average interval, 27 seconds. Another, bombs expended. The ship keeps these numbers the way a monk keeps prayers regularly, without drama, because saying them makes the next day possible. On a distant shore, a staff officer folds a map whose creases have grown white with use. He has drawn too many arrows on it. He has erased and redrawn names of fields that won't stay open, circled substations that keep refusing to hum. He wants to write a new plan, and knows the plan will grow obsolete at the pace of a catapult stroke. He is not a coward and not a fool. He is a professional living in the wrong calendar. Back on the deck, the last light paints the island gold and then grey. Men coil hoses into circles neat enough to please ghosts. A yellow shirt lifts a length of safety wire to the light, checks it, and pockets it for morning. A talker in CIC files one last sheet and draws a line under the day. These gestures are small and heavy. They say, "We can do this again." Stunned is a strange word for professionals to use about other professionals. It implies surprise, and there was surprise the first time a deck threw 90 and then had the nerve to do it again before lunch. But the lasting emotion wasn't surprise. It was recognition. Admirals on both sides knew what the numbers meant. 90 wasn't spectacle. It was policy written in steel and fuel and checklists. It was a statement that the unit of victory wasn't a mighty blow but a maintained cadence. Count the launch, then count what the count implies. Elevator cycles that didn't stall, cat strokes that didn't sag, hoses that didn't spark, pilots who didn't freelance, controllers who didn't talk themselves into noise, handlers who moved magnets on a board with a kind of love. These are the ingredients of inevitability. They are not glamorous. They will not fit on a poster. They will, however, fit into tomorrow's schedule. The camera, if you're using one, should not leave the ship. It should hold on the wake as it narrows with the fading wind, and the captain gives a small course correction that only 3 men notice. It should catch the moment when the deck goes quiet enough to hear a bosun whistle once, sharp, to mark some ordinary chore. It should wait long enough to see the red lights come on along the catwalks, the ship's night face. And then it should end on numbers, a clipboard with smudged pencil, the day's arithmetic plain and unromantic, because that is the legacy. Not thunder, not a single heroic silhouette, a habit, disciplined and repeatable, that turned the Pacific's weather and width into a set of solvable problems and left anyone outside the habit feeling like the future had decided against them.